With the Spurs guard and wing depth getting better and better every day, we just don't have space for every single player. And one writer recently revealed a trade that sends three-point sniper Julian Champagnie to the New York Knicks in exchange for a very solid backup, but it's maybe not as good as it looks on the surface. We have to dive into this pretty interesting trade coming out from Sports Illustrated, but also I have to dive into another sneaky draft target for San Antonio in the second round who could also very well fill the Spurs backup center position in a sneaky good upside of a pick. We got a lot to break down in this episode of Spurs Digest, and we'll start with the second round sneaky pick in the NBA draft. And look, there's a lot of names we can focus on, right? There's a ton of guys, and when it comes to the second round, listen, I mean, the Spurs are a team that are willing to go out of their way to pick a player that maybe other teams didn't have on their radar and pick a player that might end up having a pretty good NBA career. We do pretty well with our late firsts and even second round draft picks, but there's a name that I quite like, and it's a name that I saw circulating in a few different places, and I wanted to bring it up, and that name is Amari Williams. Now, if you're not familiar with Amari Williams, well, you probably will be. I mean, he played with Kentucky this year if you followed any college basketball, but he spent the rest of his college career before that at Drexel. Now, Amari Williams, the first thing you'll notice, he rebounds the ball pretty well. He scores at a decent rate. He's pretty efficient, 56% from the floor, 6'10", 227. He's built pretty well. Look, he's from the UK, which is pretty cool as well. But yeah, he's just one of those traditional, get some points pretty efficiently, get some rebounds, but he can also operate out of the high post. And that's what I really like with Amari Williams. Now, look, just to rip the Band-Aid off, his jumper looks gross. His jumper is clunky. It doesn't look great. His high-end shooting is not really there. The NBA level shooting is really a big question mark for him. But again, I raise you the NBA or the San Antonio Spurs depth chart heading into next year. Look, we have a lot of potential solutions for our backup center or even a backup big. Again, we have these picks earlier in the draft that could definitely be used on these guys. And look, we're not expecting a second round pick to come in and be that kind of guy right away, but if you maybe want to trade a pick, or you want to just take Dylan Harper at number 2, that's fine. That's what I'm team draft Dylan Harper, as you guys know. That's fine. Maybe you don't want to draft a big with your next pick. It's a problem for the Spurs, but drafting for fit, especially early in the draft, is something I genuinely don't like. I really like drafting best player available. So if you're sitting in the second round and you have a guy like this available, he's one of the more interesting names to me. Again, looking back at his college career, of course, a bit of a better scorer at Drexel. His free throw percentage is not great. His three-point percentage, he doesn't take them. But again, the fact that he can operate out of the high post and rebound the ball and rim protect at a very good level is what's interesting to me. Of course, multiple 2-block per game seasons at Drexel. And I just want to point out how insane that is, that he averaged 2.2 blocks a game in 27 minutes, 2 blocks a game in 20.6 minutes a night. That is nuts. In college, that is actually crazy. So he really brings a lot to the table. And this year, this is from Babcock Sports. I'll link it down below because it does give a pretty good overview of what he brings to the table. He's versatile, two-way big who brings size, strength, and passing instincts. He can facilitate offense from the high post, protect the rim, rebound effectively. He's a valuable prospect, again, despite the shooting limitations. But if he can improve those, honestly, I would say even if he can't, though we know in today's NBA that's tough, but hey, regardless, develop a more refined low post game, limit his fouling, he has potential to carve out a role as a rotational big. And that's the thing that I like, right? I don't think every prospect that you draft should be one of these guys with the super high upside. Sometimes you just need rotational guys. And a guy like Amari Williams is again, his upside, even if the shooting really doesn't improve that much, an energy two-way big who can even be your second or even third string big could be very valuable to a team. Those kind of guys matter. Now, come late playoffs, maybe not so much, but during the regular season, if you have the depth where you can afford to run these guys for 10, 12, 15 minutes a night, where they're going to give their all, they're going to have a few dunks, they're going to have a couple blocks, and they're just going to make it annoying for the other team to play you, that makes your team so much better in the regular season and can also help, rest your bigger stars. And again, one of these guys that can fill in. So look, I'm not saying he's the big grand solution for the Spurs backup big role, but I'm saying, again, if we're moving on from some of the guys on the payroll right now, again, like a Bassey, like a Mamu, this kind of stuff, you got to fill in these kind of guys. And a guy like Amari Williams, to me, has pretty high upside if, again, big if he can fix his shooting, but even if not, I think he could find a role. But let me know what you guys think down below. I love these energy bigs. They're some of my favorite archetypes in basketball. And hey, maybe you guys share the same opinion. But time to move on to this very, very interesting trade. And look, we're talking Spurs trades. Most of the talk we're talking about is Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the big stuff. But it's the sneakier, smaller trades that tend to catch my eye a lot. And I wanted to dive into this one. Now, no, that's not what I want to talk about. This here comes Sports Illustrated. Knicks Spurs could make a trade this summer. New York Knicks and San Antonio Spurs could become trade partners by Jeremy Renner, and I will link this down below as well. But this is largely based off of Greg Swartz at Bleacher Report and what he had to say. And he basically said, it's probably safe to assume that the New York Knicks will keep their core together next season, meaning no all-star trade targets here. Instead, the Knicks should be looking to improve their depth by finding rotation players on budget-friendly contracts. Champagnie is owed just $6 million over the next 2 years and would give New York a reliable forward to help spell OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. Now, this to me is interesting. Like, if I'm the New York Knicks and I'm looking around for exactly that kind of role-playing archetype three-point sniper, to me, a guy like Julian Champagnie actually fits the bill very well. We know he's a very solid shooter. Again, it's a little streaky at times, but overall, he's a guy that can really change the game for the Spurs with some decent defensive upside at times. Like, I like watching this guy play for the team. I just think for the Spurs, longer term, maybe there's a different guy that I would rather fill that role. I think Champagnie's awesome at the price tag, but I would not be opposed to moving him if the package is right. And it's that package that I'm very interested in because to me, this is a non-starter, but I want to see what you guys think because it does kind of give the Spurs that big man depth that we're talking about. And if I go to it here, they say this is back in the Sports Illustrated article, if New York can find a way to get Champagnie without having to deal Miles McBride, because they said they probably wouldn't want to deal McBride in a deal, which I think Champagnie might even be worth more, but whatever. Maybe sending someone like backup center Ariel Hukporti instead, then the Knicks may have something to negotiate. Look, Champagnie would provide backup forward role. Someday 2024 first-round pick Pacome Dadier could fill in this gap for the Knicks, but like whatever. I'm not talking about this from the Knicks perspective. I'm more curious from the Spurs perspective because Ariel Hukporti, to me, he's interesting, right? He's German. He's from Germany. 7 feet tall, 246 pounds. Now, the thing with him, when he's on, he looked really impactful for the Knicks. Now, we only played 25 games, 2 points, 2 rebounds. And he is 23 years old. This was his first NBA season. So, being the former second-round pick, spending a lot of time in Europe, all this stuff, he was picked only in the 2024 draft, again, as a 22-year-old. So, it's like, he was a later pick in the draft. He's an older guy coming in as a rookie. But he feels like one of those guys that could easily carve out a role as a backup, if not third-string center. And again, when we're talking about the Spurs needing to fill this backup third-string role, I think this makes sense. However, when you look at the makeup of the Spurs team at this moment, to me, bringing in a backup big who could end up being a decent backup, and Ariel Hukporti, I still am not sold on him completely, but he's young and he does have upside, I must admit. I quite like him as a player, if I'm being honest. I just don't see this being a starter for the Spurs when you have Julian Champagnie, like, especially on the deal he's on at $3 million a year. A guy who can snipe some threes for you, who can average 10 points a game at $3 million in Champagnie, to me is worth his weight in gold. And the Knicks should go after him. I think they absolutely should. But if we're talking a trade from the Knicks, this is not going to get it done. There are other names on the Knicks I might even be interested in. But to start this with Ariel Hukporti, I'm not so sold. But it's not so much just this one trade that I want to talk about with you guys. It's the idea that the Spurs could move on from Julian Champagnie. I know we've talked about Luke Kennard on the channel before. There's some other great three-point shooters. Cam Johnson has come up over and over again because Nets fans seem to think that he's worth the second overall pick to trade from him. Delusional. But moving on from Champagnie for someone that's even has a little bit of a higher ceiling is not bad. Now, again, it's going to cost a lot more. Champagnie is one of the most cost-effective players in the league, if you ask me. So I think his trade value should be inflated on that front. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Like, if, hypothetically, a great backup big came up in a kind of deal where a team wants a shooter, we want a backup big, and that swap could happen, would that be something you do? Again, I think Champagnie's worth more than these Knicks writers are putting out there. So anyway, I just want to hear your thoughts on that. But that'll do it for this episode of Spurs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in every single day. I've been your host, Josh Gosse, and I'll catch you in the next one.